Afternoon. I'm Salalo Makwidiri, your host, coming to you live from our studios in the heart of Johannesburg. We've got our pulse on the world's biggest stories, and today we are diving into the seismic political shift that's just rocked the United Kingdom. In a stunning landslide victory, Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have swept into power, ending 14 tumultuous years of the Conservative rule. From dramatic defeats of political heavyweights to the rise of new forces like Reform UK, this election is nothing short of historic. To unpack the implications of this political earthquake, we have a very special guest joining us. We have a UK-based social commentator and also political commentator, Abdul Wahid. With his keen insights and sharp analysis, Wahid will help us understand what this means for the UK and the world at large. Wahid, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Salam Media. Pleasure chatting to you.
Pleasure to be here, Salo.
I think first and foremost, let's get your initial reaction. What do you make of the Labour Party's landslide victory in this year's election? I'm sure it's one that has rocked the political landscape of the United Kingdom.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Honestly speaking, it is historical. It's historic in many ways, because the size of the majority is pretty huge. I think the overwhelming sentiment amongst people in the UK is relief, because it's been a very painful 6-week campaign which has been tiring people, and there is a loss of trust in the mainstream politicians in general, and that's reflected in these elections. The voter turnout since about 1970 in the UK, it's gone down. It used to be about 75% of people used to come, and since 1970 it's gone down and down and down, and this is one of the lowest turnouts we've ever had. It's about 59% turnout for people voting in this election, and that reflects a general lack of trust in the system. Actually, one survey back in 2022 found that less than half the English public felt that democracy works well for people, and even the overwhelming majority don't trust the MPs. About 76% of people in this country don't trust the MPs and don't trust the government, and that was 2 years ago, and I think it's got even worse now. And interestingly, although the Labour Party has won about 64% of the seats in the parliament here, they only won 34% of the popular vote. And what that reflects is the way the British system is set up. It's a rigged system that actually basically has two establishment parties. So both the Red Party, the Labour Party, and the Blue Party, the Conservative Party, they have to agree on some fundamentals about British democracy. So they have to be capitalist, secular, pro-Zionist, pro-colonial intervention in the world. If you're not really into those things, then you're not going to rise in politics here. And these two parties represent those. Historically, it's the Conservative Party, the Tory party that has dominated. It was in power for 14 years, the last 14 years. And there've only been, I think Mr. Starmer is, only about the 5th or 6th Labour Prime Minister of the last 200 years. So there's not many times that Labour takes power. But periodically, when the system is suffering from a lack of trust, incompetence, Labour gets a few years in power. But unfortunately, my friend, things don't change a lot for ordinary people here, and they don't change a lot in the fundamentals of the system here. So, and that is reflected in the, 40% of people didn't vote here, that's quite a big deal in a country where they call it the mother of all democracies, really. It is an indictment on the Conservative Party. 14 years, Mr. Sunak and his predecessors, Liz Truss, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, David Cameron, they have left the country in decline. There is a sense here of things in decline for ordinary people. But both these parties represent the corporate interests. So even Mr. Starmer, you'll see how he's changed. A few years ago, he said, we have a big newspaper here called The Sun, and the owner of The Sun newspaper is Rupert Murdoch, who also owns the Times newspaper, Sky Media, Talk TV, all these big media, powerful, pro-Zionist, pro-imperialist, often quite racist when you read some of the stuff that comes out of this media as well. And Rupert Murdoch owns all of this, and he's been very influential in British politics. He was a good friend of Tony Blair's, a good friend of David Cameron's, good friend of Margaret Thatcher. Starmer only a few years ago said, I'm not going to give interviews to The Sun. I'm not going to be influenced by them. And yet, before this election, he did. And he went and he played to their worst, the worst sentiments. So he started talking about the immigrants coming to the UK from Bangladesh, how they should be sent back, and this kind of language, which we're more used to hearing from the Conservatives or even Nigel Farage from the Reform UK, that kind of language. So Starmer recognized that to win the support of these kind of corporate capitalist magnates like Murdoch, you have to talk the same kind of language as everyone else. So he did that. And this is a guy who used to be a human rights lawyer.
I want us now to shift our focus a bit on, the outgoing government, the Conservative Party, and what you believe could be some of the factors that contributed to this, what many are calling a dramatic collapse in this year's elections.
Yeah, it was a dramatic collapse. In fact, that is one of the most historic things. I don't think the Conservative Party has ever done this badly. And I don't think any of us in living memory can remember ever seeing such a bad campaign from any party, to be honest with you. Look, they were in power for 14 years. They won 3 elections. It is almost unheard of in the current system that people win a 4th. So I think their time had come. Trust in the ruling party wanes after 14 years. So you get somebody to put on new clothes but do the same thing to build trust back in the system. That's one main factor. The other main factors are that their party is now associated with lying. Huge amount of lies that they've been caught out with, whether it's about COVID, whether it's about other things. There have been Conservative politicians who've been accused openly of racism. They've been accused of sexual misconduct. They in the COVID period, they gave contracts for the protective equipment, the PPE, the personal protective equipment. They gave contracts to people that they knew personally, and a lot of that equipment was rubbish and it couldn't be used. So, hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money actually these kind of projects, these kind of contracts. So this is all stuff which the Conservative Party has had on its plate. We have seen the economy declining, house prices going up, energy prices going up. They blame it on certain things. They've blamed it on COVID. They've blamed it on the war in Ukraine. But it isn't just that. I mean, there has been an energy gap in the amount of energy being produced domestically and the amount that people are consuming. And this hasn't really been spoken about. A lot of this, the Conservative Party is very pro-privatizing public utilities. So the LNG companies, the water companies, the rail networks have all been put by Conservative governments into private ownership. But the services haven't got better. In this country, there is a problem in recent months, just in the last few months. In London, the River Thames is a big river that runs through the middle of London. Raw sewage, raw human sewage waste has been going into the River Thames because the water companies, which are now in private ownership, have been just on the cheap. They've been sending this water out into the rivers. There have been 2-3 cases in districts around the UK where people have been getting infectious illnesses from water coming through the taps. And the relationship between the politicians and business is such that the politicians give these companies ownership, but they don't hold them to account on how they run them. So this is the kind of problem that people have seen in the last few years. getting worse and worse and worse. It's always
mm,
happened, my brother. But actually, one of the problems is that it's happening now in a very apparent way and in so obvious ways to day in different areas of life. So
mm,
believe it or not, one of the issues that came out here was the roads, the ordinary road networks are full of potholes, and everybody is feeling it because
mm,
why? They get taxed, but the tax money is not reinvested into things that ordinary people need to use day to day, whether it's roads or rails or the price of their electricity and gas. More and more people are having to go to food banks for their food, so they can't afford to live. They can't afford the cost of food uh, in the shops, so they go to these places where people donate surplus food to get their food. Record numbers of people have been going to food banks, and it's people who are actually sometimes working. So they're doing a job, but the amount they're earning is not collecting enough to pay their rent, pay the bills, and pay for food. Uh,
mm,
so these are some of the things that have been coming up in the last few weeks, brought up repeatedly by opposition politicians. And the Conservative Party, it keeps coming back to the fact that it will fix it if it's given another chance. But I don't think people believe them.
mm, mm,
Unfortunately, one of the big nasty policies here is the issue of migration. All right. So uh, there are two factors in that. One is refugees coming from war torn areas around the world and seeking refuge in the UK. And the UK is very slow in processing these people. They come over on boats, very small boats from France, and they claim asylum when they get here. About three-quarters of them are genuine, and about a quarter are not. But you're talking about tens of thousands of people. At the same time, the UK has a big shortage of skilled workers. So migrants are coming here, economic migrants, often from India, places in West Africa, and other European countries in the past. Now, they are coming not in tens of thousands, they are coming here for jobs in hundreds of thousands. So, like, you're talking 500,000 people.
mm,
So many people in Britain are feeling that that affects their livelihood because there aren't jobs for them, or there are suddenly more children in the school, so the school quality of teaching isn't as good, or there's suddenly more strain on the health service, so they have to wait longer for appointments. So people start blaming the migrants and they start blaming the refugees. And the Conservative Party was promising a policy to send people who got asylum here to Rwanda as a safe haven. And this divided opinion in the country. So some people were saying they thought it's a good idea, the people who would vote for Reform UK, but they criticized the Conservatives because they never delivered this policy. Other
mm,
people thought it was a bad idea, it's inhumane. Or in Mr. Starmer's case, he said it's a bad idea because you'll only be getting rid of a few hundred migrants, and we need to deal with hundreds of thousands. So these kind of debates, almost like the Conservative Party couldn't win them because from every side, people are calling out their policy, which has just actually seen the number of migrants coming here increase because Britain has a shortage of skilled labor, and they need to fill, hospital posts for nurses, or they need to fill IT jobs with people who are skilled overseas, basically.
I think it's really interesting listening to you speak because much of what you speak of and the tenure of the Conservative Party can be likened to our very own beloved ANC right here at home. But focusing on Keir Starmer, I think on his campaign trail, he was going on this tagline of national renewal. What do you think this really means? And could it in any way be likened to Donald Trump's Make America Great Again tagline?
I mean, maybe. I mean, there was a meme going round in this election of a wolf surrounded by sheep, and the wolf is like the candidate standing for the election, and he's saying, if I win, I will become a vegetarian. Yeah, and people thought that was very funny because it literally characterized all these politicians. In campaigning, they promise everything. They criticize the others and they promise everything. Starmer's word was change.
mm,
Honestly, if you understand the system, there is no real change. Really, there are two establishment parties in the UK, and they wear different colored clothes. And the change that has come is just a change of face, a very superficial change. In fact, his own finance minister, who will be his finance minister, Rachel Reeves, she has committed herself to the previous government spending plans. She's committed herself pretty much to not changing the tax system at the moment. So people are finding it hard to see what is the big difference between these two parties. There isn't a huge amount of difference. The main thing is the Conservative Party have lost this election. They have lost this election. They've lost people's trust. The reason that only about 60% of people have turned out to vote is because 40% don't trust anyone. And like I say, the Labour Party itself, it's won 2/3 of the seat in the parliament, but with only 1/3 of the share of the vote. And that's just the way the system works. What is similar to Trump is Nigel Farage. So
mm,
there is a new party called Reform UK. It hadn't got any seats, I think, prior to this election, and it's going to get about 11 or 12 in this election. And its leader is Nigel Farage. Now, Farage is basically a British version of Donald Trump. Uh, and this tells you something about politics in the UK, America, indeed in France. We're seeing an election now where the far right party of Marine Le Pen
mm,
is looking, the strongest party there. And where there's a lack of trust in the mainstream politicians, people start to look elsewhere. So this is what's happened in the UK. A lot of people, they're fed up with the mainstream politicians. They like Farage because he speaks very plainly. He talks about the issues that matter to them. I don't believe he really cares about what happens to the people that back him, but that he may do, but I don't think he comes across like a sincere politician any more than I believe Trump believes in the working man in America. But these guys become attractive to those people who've lost trust in the system. And that's where I don't think Starmer is really like that. He is the system. He is the establishment trying to save itself. He is
mm,
Biden, you could say. Yeah.
mm,
He is like Macron and Biden. Farage is the one who is the rogue element here, like Trump is the rogue element in America. And that will be interesting to see. There will be some interesting things. I think the Farage section of the population will get bigger in the next 4 years. Now he's got a platform in Parliament. He will get a bigger voice. And he's a very effective politician, by the way. He communicates very well with his audience, much better than any of the other politicians in the UK do. I don't say that admiring him. I just say that as a matter of fact in the way he is as an effective political communicator. He's very able to mobilize opinion. So I think his voice will get bigger, and that will have implications in Britain. The other thing that will have implications is not much talked about is Northern Ireland.
mm,
As you may know, there's a section of the United Kingdom which is attached to the island of Ireland, Northern Ireland. And in that election there, the party that wants to break away from the UK, Sinn Féin, they have become the largest party. And that could have implications in the next 4 or 5 years for the unity of the United Kingdom. I think you will see over years Northern Ireland loosening its connections with the United Kingdom, and this vote here, both with Starmer and with Sinn Féin, has implications for that. So, in short, to your audience, this is not the country that it once was. People called it Great Britain. The great is really not so great as it was. It's still
mm,
wealthy. It still has global influence to punch above its weight. It still looks to interfere in different parts of the world. But actually, how it looks after its own people and how its politics works it's not, for those people living here, surprised. There'll be a lot of analogies with what you've seen in your elections in South Africa. It's just
mm,
that they do it. They've been more used to doing it here for longer, so they do it in a more refined way.
No, I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see. You touched a bit on global influence. I want to touch a bit on, the current ongoing genocide in Gaza. How might the Labour Party stance on international relation issues, such as the genocide in Gaza, impact its domestic and, foreign policy agenda?
Unfortunately, it's pretty much the same line as the Conservative Party. So in the debates between Mr. Sunak and Mr. Starmer, when they were asked about Gaza, they pretty much said the same thing. Israel has a right to defend itself. We support Israel. We'll back Israel. We believe in a two-state solution in theory. We are very sad about the humanitarian loss in Gaza. We want more humanitarian aid to get through. We want to see an end to this crisis. But when it came to actually doing anything tangible, both main party leaders, both parties have backed the genocide all the way. Now, unfortunately, the result for Mr. Starmer has been he's got a landslide victory, but that hasn't been without some damage to him. Why? And this is mainly because of the Muslim community. There has been a backlash. Labour is the party that the Muslim community historically has backed. But the Muslim community here has been so outraged by Starmer's stance on this that they've left Labour and they've been backing independents MPs. And in a few cases, they have won. Independent MPs have been selected where in other places they would have been Labour in the past. And that's been because of the Muslims voting against Labour because of their stance on the Gaza genocide. We have to remember, the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Balfour was a conservative. His prime minister, he was a foreign minister of this country, but he was a conservative. The prime minister at that time was Lloyd George, who was a liberal, which is one of the other establishment parties here. And after that Balfour Declaration and the British occupying Palestine after World War One, it was a Labour government that allowed huge numbers of Jewish refugees and migrants to come to Palestine and settle there, completely changing the demographic. And for the last 100 years, all three of these main parties, Conservative, Labour and Liberal, have all backed the Zionist project. Starmer was a human rights lawyer. He once was in The Hague prosecuting Serbian war criminals. And yet this man, who is a human rights lawyer, accepted the fact that the Zionist regime were cutting off food and water to the people of Gaza. And people called him out as a war criminal for saying that, for supporting war crimes. Imagine how much he has changed as a human being, where on one genocide he was prosecuting the killers, and in another genocide he's defending the killers.
And I think the people that I think would be interesting to hear about their future and just their standing in the UK right now is the minorities. What is the future of minorities like the Muslim people, like immigrants that have come in, going to look like now going forward under this new administration?
Yeah, I wish I could say it will be better. But unfortunately, all the rhetoric that comes from the Labour Party is very similar to the Conservative Party. And the way that they're treating the Muslim minorities is something that the establishment parties are unified on. So they have very oppressive policies here against Muslims, controlling what's taught in schools and mosques and these kind of things more and more and more over time, and a very, very Islamophobic rhetoric that comes from these politicians. And it didn't really change in this campaign. And so over the last, I would say, since 1997, the policies of both parties towards the Muslim communities have been the same, whether under Blair, under Cameron, under Boris Johnson, under Rishi Sunak, and really the rhetoric under Keir Starmer is the same. So I wish, and sadly, and you may see this sort of thing in South Africa as well, but sadly, there are Muslim people who will back that, Muslim people in the Labour Party or indeed in the Conservative Party who support these anti-Muslim policies. Historically, the colonialists couldn't rule over the colonies without recruiting some of the indigenous people to do the dirty work for them, and this is the same within the politics of the UK as well. You will see Muslim named people with brown faces who are effectively supporting policies which are against what the Muslim community want, and that's a very sad state of affairs.
Very sad. I think we've seen glimpses of that right here in South Africa during our elections. I want to focus on Rishi Sunak. I think we've all seen his concession speech. How do you think that will influence, the future direction of the Conservative Party regarding, his day?
So I think he's planning to stay on just as a caretaker until a new administration is until a new leader of his party is selected. He has every British Prime Minister that resigns has very lucrative corporate consultancy contracts that they get afterwards. So he has a lucrative career ahead of him in terms of advising companies around the world as to how they can get the most out of Britain, because he has privileged insider information from the last few years. So all his predecessors will have done this and managed to do this. So he will move out of politics, I'm sure. He's a young man. He had a career in finance beforehand. He's made his millions from that, and he could go back to that. But I suspect he'll go into more of this sort of consultancy work that Blair and Cameron and others do after they leave head office. His party is heading for a very, very nasty bloodbath. It's very divided. The parliamentary party has, a much smaller number of MPs, and it's very divided between the real hawks in their party and the kind of more pragmatic ones in there. The hawks are closer to the Reform UK type people, and the pragmatic ones are kind of closer to Starmer's type Labour Party. And I think this fight will go on for a bit. This fight will go on, and Sunak will stay just until they've got a new leader, and then he'll step away. I would be surprised if he serves another 5 years as an MP. I think once he steps down, he might resign some way down the line in a couple of years.
We have run out of time, but just your parting shot, what should the rest of the world look out for, with regards to the United Kingdom, its role in international relations, and its positioning with the new administration having come to play? Will there be major changes? Is it going to be more of the same? Just in parting, in closing, how can you wrap it all up?
Largely more of the same. Pro-Zionist, pro-intervention in other parts of the world, sticking their nose in when they shouldn't. Probably the big change is Starmer is more pro-European. So I think you will see not a reversal of Brexit. I don't think that will happen. But I think you will see some move towards trying to build a better relationship with Europe going forward. So I think that definitely is that's probably one of the big differences between his party and the Conservatives. The Conservatives have too many anti-Europeans in it to do that. So I think Starmer will slightly bring Britain back towards relations with Europe. But fundamentally, on the things for the rest of the world, nothing's going to change.
All right. And with that, we have come to a truly enlightening conversation. Abdul, thank you so much for giving us your time. I'm sure we'll be keeping in touch.
Take care.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in this afternoon. Stay with us for more in-depth analysis and discussions on the stories that shape our world. This is Salalo Makwidiri signing off from Johannesburg. Until next time, keep questioning, keep engaging, and keep listening to Salam Media. Goodbye and take care.